Hey today I'm going to be talking about God's grace, or rather what it looks like when God's grace is removed. I was praying for the ministry and what to share, and this is what he placed on my spirit. This is also a personal lesson that I've had to go through recently. I've talked about this before, but I'm going to go a little more in depth and give you about like 13 points or so about what this looks like. It's important for us to realize that God's grace sustains everything. I've spoken about this before, but truly, 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 everything is sustained by God's grace. As I was thinking about or preparing for this, I was reminded, or shown, I should say actually maybe, that God's grace is like spiritual gravity. It's the force that holds everything together, spiritually speaking. And I find that really beautiful. And without it, chaos ensues. Now, God's grace is important to take heed of because, number one, it's a communication from Him. And within that communication, He is trying to convey 3 different messages, depending on the situation. He's either trying to convey a warning or preparation / elevation by removing His grace. Now, what do I mean by a warning? Just as I was saying, when God's grace is removed, chaos ensues. And at times, that will be the case, and He may want to preserve you from the chaos that will come your way if you stay in that position, that situation, that relationship, etc. I'm reminded of like a Sodom and Gomorrah type situation. And who is it? Lot being removed from the area. And Abraham too, right? Being removed from the area. Everything works together for our good. So while it may not feel like it, He'll be removing you with good intention, for a reason, even if you can't see it in the here and the now. In fact, you probably won't be able to. From our view, it's like, God, why is this ending? Like, I love this person, I want this person in my life. I love this job, whatever. He's seeing it from a different perspective. Or He's trying to prepare you for what's next and elevate you. He has more for us than we can possibly think or imagine. And sometimes, in order for us to even consider that or seek Him to consider that, we have to be removed from our current circumstances. Or our current circumstances have to become very unfavorable for us to even pick up on that. So there's that. So God's grace can leave a situation, a relationship, career, action. There can even be a removal of grace to pray for something or a situation, or no grace at all, to intercede or fast, etc. Actually, to be honest, one of the ways, if I'm praying specifically for healing, but praying for someone, there is actually a feeling, I guess, to describe it as a feeling. I don't know how else to describe it, but I can pick up on if I have grace to pray or not to pray. And it feels like a feeling is the best way I can say it, but it's actually God's grace. And if His grace is with it, I continue. If His grace is not with it, I'm honest, and I'm like, look, I'm sorry. Maybe find someone else to pray or whatever the situation. But I personally, if there is any solution that's going to happen in this situation, because sometimes, you know, the solution may not be what we want, or some things just have to end, some things just have to die. But help me, Lord. But it may not be through me that he's going to give the solution, so I just have to be honest about that. But anyways, I'm going to look at some scriptures later, but I'm just going to get into it right now, okay? So, knowing God's grace has left the situation. Number 1, fatigue. This fatigue is not just tiredness, not just I didn't get enough sleep. This fatigue is very, very deep-seated and very heavy. Oftentimes it will feel like your body straight up, just all the stamina, all the stamina, I guess, I don't know, has just left it. Or some people say virtue. It's like when you get sick, if you've ever gotten like a fever particularly, and you feel that fatigue that comes along with it, or fatigue, if you just felt fatigue, and it's just like your body literally just, you know, like it feels heavy. You'll feel that level of feeling if God's grace has been removed. Consideration with what I'm going to share, though, needs to be that you have to listen to every single point, because that in of itself, the feeling of fatigue, I mentioned this in I think my last video, could be an attack. It will feel the exact same. You will have to discern, okay, this doesn't make sense as to why I'm this tired. Every time I want to go to church, every time I want to pray, every time I think about spending time with God, whatever. Versus, or it could even be like work or relationship or whatever. You feeling that fatigue in of itself does not necessarily mean that it's a lack of God's grace. It could be a spiritual attack. So you have to discern. Loss of favor, point number 2, is loss of favor. Could be with coworkers, a sudden dislike for you, your boss, or inability to perform good work. I'm going to use the example of work throughout this, but it's not necessarily just work. Could be a favor with your significant other, whatever the case is. Loss of favor. Out of nowhere, you know. Could be God's grace being removed in that situation. Point number 3, everything becomes your fault. Whether true or just being blamed, all signs will point to you as the source of the problem. I quoted Jonah 1:4-15 as a reference. To paraphrase, that's when Jonah, there's a storm happening because Jonah is on the boat disobeying God. And the more he stays on there, the worse it gets. It's not until he's thrown into the water that things calm down. Everything you may be bringing in a level of chaos because God is trying to remove you out of there. I feel like this is really a thing that you will see like at work, but I'm sure it could show up in other situations as well. Point number 4, a feeling of emptiness. This can go along with the fatigue feeling, but you will feel physically, you will physically feel a sense of emptiness, shallowness, like you're there but not really there. Like you're there only in body only. You know, your mind just is not there. Your everything else is just not there. If you ever felt that, you know how it feels. You like disassociate. It's not a great feeling, especially when you have a job to do or need to show up for a person or something like that, it's you can't really continue. That hollowness just really messes with you. It's a similar feeling if you've ever experienced like depression and you're trying to make it through your day and it's just like you're like absent from yourself. You're absent from your own, you know, body in a sense. So that and fatigue go hand in hand, but that feeling of emptiness, a sign of God's favor, grace, sorry, but also favor, leaving a situation. A feeling like you shouldn't be here, a deep-seated feeling like this is not right for me. I don't know why, it doesn't make sense. On paper, everything looks great, but, this isn't right for me. Or, for some reason, I feel like that might be more right for me. Now, you have to discern where that's coming from. Do you have a jealousy issue? Are you, you have an endurance issue? You don't self-control issue. You don't stick with something and you're just like looking over. You have to discern. Or, is it God saying, this isn't right for you? You said a number of times, I cannot see myself in this situation 5 years from now. Well, maybe it's time to go. Point number, what are we on? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Brain fog or confusion, a lack of being able to function mentally or an inability to perform at the level you were or should be, even though, especially even though you've done this like a million times. Especially you'll see this if you need to leave a job, but it's like you can't get it together and there's no real reason as to why you shouldn't be able to get it together. It doesn't make any sort of sense. Brain fog and confusion, which also go along with fatigue. Number 7, increase in carnality, carnal thoughts, feelings, dreams, or actions. This is something where it will creep in so subtly. And it might not sound that bad. Carnality in of itself is not a sin, but it will make you very susceptible to it. Little example, recently when the Lord was showing me that I was in the wrong where I was at, I started having really weird dreams that were just very active, but were of no like substance. It wasn't God speaking, it was just my imagination or my subconscious or whatever, just going off. And I was over here one moment, over there one moment. It's like, what? I was delivered from this. And the thing with that is that you can have such a lack of rest when you have those kind of dreams, at least for me, because dreams are a way in which God speaks. So I'm like, reviewing these dreams and I'm like, none of this makes sense. It's really tiring and goes along with the fatigue issue. But you can become more carnal in your thoughts, more fleshly in your thoughts, in your feelings, in your words, in your actions. That has been my downfall before. And if you're going to increase in carnality, you're going to decrease in spirituality. The two are enemies of one another. And we're called to live in the Spirit. Walk in the Spirit. So if we're increasing in carnality, there's a major problem there. Number 8, decrease in hearing God's voice. This is the natural thing that will follow an increase in carnality. It will be a lot more difficult to hear from the Lord. A lot more difficult for him to get your attention because your mind is now carnal. It's removed from spiritual things, so it will be harder to discipline yourself. That was a really big issue for me. It was hard to even discipline it. Even when I spent my time in prayer, I was still kind of thinking about my job or, the money I needed, whatever the case is. A decrease in hearing God's voice, an ability to hear or perceive God. Number 9, 10, whatever. Decrease in spiritual stamina and power, an inability to pray or tarry in God's presence. Fast or decrease I wrote that really weird. Decrease in, to produce power, and where power once was. So if you realize, like, okay, my prayers don't seem to be doing anything, well, that's a problem. Inability to pray. Again, silence your mind. Focus on something. Wrong. Sickness. Point blank period. God can bring about sickness because you're not where you need to be. Again, if God's hand is sustaining everything, even your health, that includes your health. But I have also heard stories of, and actually now that I think about it, I have had a few times where the Lord would cause some sort of pain or sickness to come up over me because there was a situation that I wasn't supposed to be in. Wow. Like, I wanted to do something, I wanted to go somewhere, and maybe I knew deep down I shouldn't have, maybe I didn't, I don't know, but for some reason some sickness will come over me out of nowhere. And it's easy to think, oh my gosh, the enemy's attacking me, but actually it was God's hand to say, my grace is not with this. I heard a story really quickly where it was someone who got, I think it was diagnosed with cancer or something like that. This was someone at my church, and it was crazy because for her it was like, oh, this is happening like in the middle of, some situation at work or whatever, but it actually turned out to be a blessing because there was an attack that was going to come towards her if she was still at work. So God is amazing. Sickness can be a sign of the lack of his grace, and if you're fatigued too, that can also go hand in hand. Your body just can't get it together. Sickness. Especially out of nowhere. Sickness, and it doesn't make any sense for you. Last point, difficulties increase. This can either look like a specific situation just seems to get worse and worse and worse, and nothing you can do, no prayer, say it's a difficult boss, no prayer, no kindness, no whatever, is making it worse and worse and worse. Now, that does not in of itself mean that that's a lack of grace, because that may be God testing you. Are you going to be able to endure? But it could be a lack of grace, that it's like, look, whatever you're trying, it's not going to work. Or, you need to, back away from this or whatever. I like to kind of think of the example with Pharaoh and Moses. I don't know if that's the best example, but God had to, unfortunately, bring all those plagues on him for him to come to a place of conviction. There was nothing that Moses could really say or do, which is such an interesting thing to consider, but he said, let my people go, and Pharaoh kept flip-flopping. God had to intervene. So either the situation will get worse and worse and worse, or things will start, in general, getting worse. This kind of goes along with the point where I say loss of favor, or everything becomes your fault. Yeah. It's like, the situation just, well, now what? Well, now what? Well, now what? I experienced this recently. Sorry, my nose is really itchy. I experienced this relatively recently where I knew God was trying to get me and my household to focus on him in a way that we hadn't, and commune with him in a way that we hadn't, and everything, and I mean everything, started to go wrong. First, he had made it so that I had limited resources, basically, financially. And then things started to go wrong, that you needed money for. And it's like, well, if I do this, this will be an issue. And if I do that, well, now this came up, and I can't do that if I don't have. It was like way beyond my pay grade. So I'm like, okay, this is not how this should go. But that could also look like an enemy attack, so you have to be discerning. Or it could be a sign of an enemy attack. Let me get into these verses and call it a day. So the 3 verses that the Lord placed on my heart are found in Isaiah, all 3 of them. And first we're going to look at Isaiah 46:6, I believe. No, it's not. I feel like I always get the wrong. 46:4. Even to your old age and gray hairs, I am he. I am he who will sustain you. I have made you and I will carry you. I will sustain you and I rescue you. And I will rescue you. Isn't that sweet? But it's just the understanding that God will sustain you. God is sustaining us. Recently I was convicted that within this situation that I was starting to make this thing, I was starting to make this job, this income, my source, and looking at it like, oh, I gotta do this, I gotta do that, gotta take this extra shift, gotta stay late, gotta go in early, blah, blah, blah. And I was making it my source, and I'm like, oh, Lord, forgive me. Lord, forgive me, because you are my source. You're sustaining this. I could lose the job tomorrow, and I need to be aware of that. Okay, this is Isaiah 41:10, which says, so do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Right hand symbolizes strength in the Bible. This is the idea that when the Lord sends you to do something, whether you absolutely hate it, or excited by it, or indifferent, or whatever, he will not only sustain you, as we've seen in the previous verse, he will also strengthen you. There will be a supernatural strength to endure. You may go back and forth, and you may feel like, I can't do this anymore, this is too much, but your spirit will keep being renewed. Like the strength of your spirit will keep being renewed, if that makes sense. So you might emotionally feel like you can't handle it, but like honestly, you'll get back up the next day and you'll be like, all right, what you got for me today? That's a metaphor for how our walk is, to be honest. So this is Isaiah 60:22. It says, I've done something wrong. That's what it says. What the heck? I always do this. I'm so sorry. 60:22. Well, I can't find it. That's crazy. Oh my gosh. But it's the verse that says, when the time is right, I, the Lord, will make it happen. Many of us, grace expires because, just like I was just saying, we try and make that relationship, that income, that situation, the source of whatever. And we have to be reminded that when the time is right, the Lord will make it come to pass. All you need to do is trust in him. It's his grace that sustains. It's not your ability to work. It's not your ability to show up. It's not your ability to whatever. I always like to consider the fact that there are people with more ability in certain situations, or less ability in certain situations than myself, and they may be less and farther along, or they may be greater and not as far along. It has nothing to do with our abilities. That's just a fraction of the equation, if that makes sense. Everything is by God's favor and by God's grace. So, I hope this helps. If you're going through this, seek the Lord. Seek the Lord. He's got something for you. I pray this blesses you. Bye.